Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other recruits at the naval training facility. At 23, she was one of only 4 women in a group of 60 aspiring sailors, and her small frame of 5 feet 2 inches made her stand out even more among the towering men around her. What made things worse was her quiet nature and the thick glasses she wore, which had earned her the cruel nickname Four Eyes from day one. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training grounds as Sarah struggled to keep up with the physical demands of basic training. Her drill instructor, Sergeant Morrison, was a mountain of a man who seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out her every weakness. Today was no different as she fell behind during the morning run, her breathing labored and her legs feeling like lead. "Martinez! Move your sorry excuse for legs!" Morrison bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire training ground. "My grandmother could outrun you, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other recruits snickered and whispered among themselves as Sarah pushed herself harder, her face red with both exertion and embarrassment. She had joined the Navy to prove something to herself and to honor her brother Miguel, who had died serving overseas. But every day felt like a new battle against not just the physical challenges, but the constant ridicule and dismissal from her peers. During lunch break, Sarah sat alone at the far end of the mess hall, picking at her food while trying to ignore the pointed stares and hushed comments from the other tables. She overheard snippets of conversation about how she didn't belong there, how she was too weak, too small, too different. The words stung more than any physical pain from training. "Hey, Four Eyes," called out Jake Thompson, one of the loudest and most popular recruits in their group. He was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, muscular, confident, and seemingly effortless in everything he did. "Maybe you should consider switching to the Coast Guard. I hear they need people to watch for lost kittens." The table erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame. She wanted to disappear, to quit, to run away from this place where she felt so unwelcome and out of place. But something deeper inside her, something connected to Miguel's memory and her own stubborn determination, kept her rooted to the spot. The afternoon brought combat training, and Sarah found herself paired with different recruits for various exercises. Each pairing seemed to reinforce her status as the weak link in the group. During hand-to-hand combat practice, she was easily overpowered by opponents who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. During weapons training, her smaller hands struggled with equipment designed for larger frames. "This is pathetic," muttered Rick Coleman, another recruit who had made it his mission to remind Sarah daily that she didn't belong. "How is someone like her supposed to protect our country? She can barely protect herself from a strong breeze." The worst moment came during rope climbing exercises. Sarah had always struggled with upper body strength, and as she hung there halfway up the rope, her arms shaking with effort, she could hear the jeers and comments from below. Morrison stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head in apparent disappointment. "Martinez, if you can't make it up a simple rope, how do you expect to handle real combat situations?" he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't summer camp. This is preparation for life and death situations." Sarah's arms finally gave out, and she slid down the rope, landing hard on the mat below. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but not as much as the sound of mocking laughter that followed. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling of the training facility, wondering if everyone was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she was fooling herself thinking she could make it through this program. That evening, Sarah retreated to her bunk early, pulling her blanket over her head to muffle the sounds of her roommates talking and laughing. She thought about Miguel, about how proud he had been to serve, about the stories he used to tell her about the brotherhood and honor of military service. But all she had experienced so far was isolation and humiliation. She pulled out a worn photograph of Miguel in his dress uniform, his smile bright and confident. He had always believed in her, even when no one else did. Even when their own father had expressed doubts about her decision to join the Navy. Miguel had been the one to drive her to the recruiting station, the one to tell her that strength came in many forms, not just physical. As she lay there in the darkness, Sarah made a quiet promise to herself and to Miguel's memory. She wouldn't quit, no matter how hard it got, no matter how many people told her she didn't belong. She would find a way to prove herself, even if she had no idea how. The next few days followed the same pattern. morning runs where she struggled to keep pace, physical training where she was consistently outperformed, and mealtimes spent in lonely isolation while enduring the constant stream of jokes and comments about her presence in the program. The other female recruits had either dropped out or formed their own tight-knit group that didn't include Sarah, leaving her more isolated than ever. During one particularly difficult obstacle course training session, Sarah found herself face-to-face with what seemed like an impossible challenge. The course included a high wall that required significant upper body strength to climb over, followed by a series of rope bridges and cargo net climbs. She watched as recruit after recruit completed the course with varying degrees of success, but all managing to finish within the allotted time. When her turn came, Sarah approached the wall with grim determination. She had studied the technique, knew what she needed to do, but her body simply couldn't match her mental understanding. After 3 failed attempts to scale the wall, Morrison called time on her run. "That's it, Martinez. You're done for today," he announced. "Maybe tomorrow you'll surprise us all and actually complete something." The humiliation was complete when Thompson loudly suggested that maybe they should build a smaller version of the obstacle course just for Sarah, complete with training wheels and safety padding. The comment drew harsh laughter from most of the group, and Sarah felt something inside her crack a little more. But it was during weapons maintenance training that Sarah finally found something she could excel at. Her attention to detail, her methodical nature, and her genuine interest in understanding how things worked gave her an advantage. She could field strip and reassemble an M16 rifle faster than anyone else in her group, and her weapons were always spotless during inspections. For a brief moment, she thought this might be her chance to gain some respect from her peers and instructors. But even this small victory was dismissed by Thompson and his followers as just cleaning guns and not real military skill. The brief hope she had felt quickly faded back into the familiar pattern of dismissal and ridicule. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal training week where everything seemed to go wrong at once. Sarah failed a timed run by 30 seconds, scored poorly on a written exam due to lack of sleep, and accidentally dropped her rifle during a parade drill, causing Morrison to unleash a verbal assault that left her shaking. "Martinez, I've seen wet paper bags with more backbone than you," Morrison had shouted in front of the entire formation. "If you can't handle basic training, what makes you think you can handle the real Navy? You're not just failing yourself, you're potentially putting future shipmates at risk with your incompetence." That night, Sarah sat on her bunk and seriously considered quitting for the first time since arriving at the facility. She had her resignation letter half written when she remembered something Miguel had told her during one of his last visits home. He had talked about the moments when everything seemed impossible, when the training pushed him beyond what he thought he could endure, and how those moments were when real character was revealed. She tore up the resignation letter and instead wrote a new letter to Miguel, telling him about the challenges she was facing and asking for strength to continue. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her pillowcase, right next to his photograph. The next morning brought a new type of training exercise, a long-distance endurance test that would push every recruit to their limits. Sarah approached it with a different mindset, not focused on competing with the others, but simply on completing the challenge on her own terms. She set her own pace, controlled her breathing, and, for the first time in weeks, she finished a physical challenge without being the last one across the line. It wasn't a victory that anyone else noticed or celebrated, but, for Sarah, it represented something important. It was proof that she could push through when everything seemed hopeless, that she could find strength she didn't know she had. It was a small step forward in what felt like an endless journey, but it was progress nonetheless. As she walked back to the barracks that evening, slightly less battered than usual, Sarah didn't know that her real test was still ahead of her. She didn't know that within days, everything would change in ways she could never have imagined. She only knew that she had survived another day, and that somehow, that felt like enough for now. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Sarah woke before dawn, made her bunk with military precision, and prepared for another day of challenges that seemed designed to break her spirit. The routine had become familiar over the past 3 months: morning calisthenics, breakfast eaten in silence while enduring sideways glances, followed by whatever training exercise Morrison had planned to test their limits. But today felt different from the moment Sarah stepped outside the barracks. There was an unusual energy in the air, a tension among the drill instructors that she couldn't quite place. Morrison seemed more on edge than usual, constantly checking his watch and scanning the horizon as if expecting something important. "Listen up, maggots!" Morrison barked as the recruits assembled for morning formation. "Today we're hosting some special guests. Navy SEAL Team 7 is conducting training exercises in our area, and their commanding officer will be observing some of our activities. I want every one of you sorry excuses for sailors to perform like your lives depend on it, because frankly, your futures in this Navy might." The announcement sent a ripple of excitement and nervousness through the group of recruits. Navy SEALs were legendary figures to aspiring sailors, representing the absolute pinnacle of military excellence and toughness. For most of the recruits, this was an opportunity to potentially impress some of the most elite warriors in the world. For Sarah, it felt like yet another chance to be humiliated in front of an even more distinguished audience. She had heard stories about SEALs, about their impossible standards and their ability to spot weakness from a mile away. The thought of performing poorly in front of such elite soldiers made her stomach twist with anxiety. The morning training began with the usual physical exercises, but there was a noticeable increase in intensity and precision. Every recruit seemed to be pushing themselves harder, trying to stand out in case the legendary SEALs were watching. Sarah threw herself into the exercises with everything she had, determined not to embarrass herself any more than necessary. During a particularly grueling set of bear crawls across the hot asphalt, Sarah noticed a group of men in different uniforms standing near the observation area. Even from a distance, she could tell these weren't regular naval personnel. They carried themselves with a different kind of confidence, a quiet intensity that seemed to command respect without saying a word. As the morning progressed, the SEAL observers moved closer to the training areas, occasionally making notes or speaking in low voices among themselves. Sarah tried not to look in their direction, focusing instead on completing each exercise to the best of her ability, even though she knew she was still falling behind many of her male counterparts in terms of raw physical performance. The breaking point came during hand-to-hand combat training. Sarah was paired with Thompson, who had been particularly cruel to her over the past few weeks. As they began their sparring session, it quickly became apparent that he saw this as an opportunity to really humiliate her in front of the distinguished visitors. Thompson used his significant size and strength advantage not just to win the match, but to make Sarah look foolish. He would let her attempt a move, then easily counter it while making exaggerated expressions of surprise, as if he couldn't believe how weak her attacks were. The other recruits began to laugh and make comments, feeding off the spectacle. "Come on, 4 eyes," Thompson taunted loudly enough for everyone to hear, including the SEAL observers. "Is that the best you've got? My little sister hits harder than that, and she's only 12. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she kept trying, attempting different techniques she had practiced, only to be easily deflected and countered by Thompson's superior size and strength. With each failed attempt, the laughter grew louder, and she could feel the eyes of the SEAL team members on her. Morrison, perhaps feeling pressure to maintain discipline in front of the elite visitors, should have stopped the excessive display, but instead he seemed content to let it continue, occasionally shaking his head as if disappointed by Sarah's performance. The match continued longer than it should have, with Thompson clearly toying with Sarah rather than ending it quickly. He would pin her, let her struggle free, then easily take her down again, all while providing commentary for the entertainment of their audience. "Maybe we should get her some platform shoes," Thompson called out during one exchange. "Might help her reach my chin at least." The comment drew the biggest laugh yet from the watching recruits, and Sarah felt something inside her break. Not her determination to continue, but her last shred of hope that she might ever earn respect from these people through conventional means. She was trapped in a system that seemed designed to highlight her weaknesses while dismissing her strengths. Finally, mercifully, Morrison called an end to the exercise. Sarah picked herself up from the mat, her uniform dirty and her pride in tatters, while Thompson basked in the attention and approval of his peers. She avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially the SEAL observers, certain that she had just provided them with a perfect example of why women didn't belong in combat roles. During the lunch break that followed, Sarah found herself more isolated than ever. The morning's humiliation had somehow made her even more of an outsider, and she could hear whispered conversations about how embarrassing it must have been for the SEAL team to witness such a pathetic display. She sat alone at her usual table, mechanically eating her food while trying to process the morning's events. Part of her wanted to be angry at Thompson for his unnecessary cruelty, at Morrison for allowing it to continue, at the system that seemed stacked against her from the beginning. But, mostly she just felt tired, worn down by months of constant struggle against seemingly insurmountable odds. It was then that she noticed one of the SEAL team members approaching her table. He was a tall man with graying hair and intense eyes, wearing the distinctive uniform that marked him as someone who had earned his place among the military's elite. Sarah's first instinct was to look away, to avoid whatever criticism or dismissal he was surely approaching to deliver. Instead, the man sat down across from her without invitation, his expression serious but not unkind. Up close, Sarah could see that he was older than she had initially thought, probably in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent years in challenging environments. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, though he had already taken a seat. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being listened to, but there was also a gentleness there that surprised Sarah. "Of course, sir," Sarah managed to say, though her voice came out smaller than she had intended. She still couldn't bring herself to make direct eye contact, certain that whatever conversation was about to happen would only add to her humiliation. "I'm Commander David Reeves," the man said, extending his hand across the table. "And you're Martinez, correct?" Sarah nodded and shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip and the fact that he seemed to know her name. She had assumed that if the SEAL team members knew anything about her, it would only be as the recruit who had embarrassed herself during the morning's exercises. "I've been watching your training today," Reeves continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "And, I have to say, I'm impressed by something I saw." Sarah looked up at him then, confusion clear on her face. Impressed? There was nothing about her performance that morning that could have possibly impressed anyone, let alone a Navy SEAL commander. "Sir, I think there might be some mistake," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't exactly cover myself in glory out there today." Commander Reeves studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Physical strength isn't the only thing we look for in a soldier, Martinez. In fact, it's not even the most important thing. What I saw today was someone who kept getting knocked down and kept getting back up. Someone who didn't quit even when everything was stacked against them." His words caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on her failures, on her inability to match the physical performance of her male counterparts, that she hadn't considered that her persistence might be viewed as a strength rather than just stubborn refusal to accept reality. "I've been in this business for 22 years, Reeves continued. I've seen a lot of recruits come and go. Some of the strongest, most naturally gifted ones wash out because they can't handle adversity. They're used to things coming easy, so when they hit a real challenge, they fold. But someone who's used to fighting for every inch, who knows how to dig deep when things get tough? That's the kind of person who survives when everything goes to hell." Sarah felt a strange mix of hope and skepticism at his words. It was the first time in months that anyone had suggested she might have value as a potential sailor, but she had been disappointed so many times that she was afraid to believe it. "I appreciate that, sir, but I'm not sure persistence alone is going to be enough," Sarah said honestly. "I can't outrun, outfight, or outmuscle most of the people here. And if I can't do that, how can I be an effective member of a team?" Commander Reeves leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Let me tell you something about real military operations, Martinez. They're not decided by who can do the most push-ups or who can climb a rope the fastest. They're decided by who can think clearly under pressure, who can adapt when plans fall apart, who can keep going when everything seems hopeless." He paused for a moment, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I've seen big, strong men freeze up completely in actual combat situations. And I've seen people half their size step up and save lives because they had the mental toughness to function when it mattered most." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the lunch period ending, with other recruits beginning to clear their tables and prepare for afternoon training. Commander Reeves stood up, but before leaving, he looked down at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll be observing more of your training over the next few days," he said. "I'm curious to see how you handle different types of challenges." As he walked away, Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope. For the first time since arriving at the training facility, someone in a position of authority had seen something positive in her performance. Someone whose opinion carried real weight had suggested that she might have what it takes to succeed. The afternoon training sessions took on a different quality for Sarah. She approached each exercise with renewed energy, not because she expected to suddenly outperform her peers, but because she now had a different perspective on what success might look like. Instead of focusing solely on her physical limitations, she began to pay attention to her mental approach, her problem-solving abilities, her resilience in the face of setbacks. During a complex navigation exercise, Sarah found herself naturally taking on a leadership role within her assigned team. Her methodical approach and attention to detail helped them avoid several potential wrong turns, and her ability to remain calm under pressure proved valuable when they encountered unexpected obstacles. For once, her teammates seemed to appreciate her contributions rather than dismiss them. Even Thompson, though still maintaining his generally hostile attitude, seemed to grudgingly acknowledge that she had helped their team achieve one of the best completion times of the day. That evening, as Sarah prepared for sleep, she felt a cautious optimism that she hadn't experienced since arriving at the training facility. Commander Reeves' words had given her a new framework for understanding her place in the military, and, for the first time, that place didn't seem impossible to achieve. She pulled out Miguel's photograph and whispered a quiet thank you, both to her brother's memory and to whatever force had brought Commander Reeves to her table that day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but, for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she might be ready for them. The next morning arrived with an unusual announcement that would change the trajectory of Sarah's entire military experience. Commander Reeves had requested permission to design a special training exercise that would test the recruits in ways beyond conventional physical challenges. Morrison seemed both honored and nervous about hosting such a distinguished guest instructor, and he made it clear that every recruit needed to perform at their absolute best. Today you'll be participating in a scenario-based exercise designed by Commander Reeves and his team, Morrison announced as the recruits assembled in their formation. This isn't your typical obstacle course or physical fitness test. This is about decision-making under pressure, leadership in crisis situations, and the kind of mental toughness that separates real soldiers from weekend warriors. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension about this new type of challenge. While she had consistently struggled with the purely physical aspects of training, the promise of an exercise that emphasized mental capabilities gave her hope that she might finally have a chance to prove herself in a meaningful way. The exercise was set up in a large warehouse facility that had been converted into a complex urban warfare simulation. The recruits were divided into teams of 6 and, given a challenging scenario, they were part of a humanitarian aid mission that had come under attack, with wounded civilians and damaged equipment scattered throughout the area. Each team had to navigate through the simulated environment, make critical decisions about priorities and resources, and work together to achieve their objectives while under time pressure and simulated enemy fire. Sarah found herself assigned to a team that included Thompson, 2 other male recruits named Collins and Rodriguez, and one of the other female recruits, Angela Peters. The team dynamics were immediately challenging, as Thompson automatically assumed leadership of the group and began issuing orders without consulting the others. "All right, listen up," Thompson said as they prepared to enter the simulation area. "I'll take point and make the major decisions. Collins and Rodriguez, you're with me on security. Peters, you handle any civilians we encounter. Martinez, you can carry extra supplies and follow my lead." It was exactly the kind of dismissive assignment that Sarah had grown accustomed to, relegating her to a support role while others took on the more significant responsibilities. But something about Commander Reeves' words from the previous day gave her the courage to speak up. "Maybe we should discuss strategy as a team before we go in," Sarah suggested quietly. "We don't know what we're going to encounter in there, and having multiple perspectives might help us make better decisions." Thompson turned to look at her with barely concealed irritation. "For eyes, this isn't a democracy. Someone needs to be in charge, and, frankly, yesterday's sparring session pretty clearly established who that should be." The comment stung, but Sarah noticed that Angela Peters looked uncomfortable with Thompson's dismissive attitude, and both Collins and Rodriguez seemed uncertain about his assumption of authority. Before anyone could respond further, Commander Reeves appeared near their team to provide final instructions. "Remember, this exercise is about more than just completing objectives," he said, looking directly at each team member. "We'll be evaluating how you work together, how you adapt to unexpected situations, and how you handle leadership responsibilities. Don't assume that the loudest voice or the biggest personality is automatically the best choice for making decisions." His words seemed directed toward Thompson, but his gaze lingered on Sarah for just a moment longer than the others, and she felt a spark of encouragement from his subtle support. The simulation began with their team entering what appeared to be a damaged aid station. Immediately, they were confronted with multiple scenarios requiring urgent attention: simulated wounded civilians calling for help, scattered medical supplies that needed to be organized, and intelligence reports indicating potential enemy movement in the area. Thompson immediately charged toward what he perceived as the most action-oriented task, directing Collins and Rodriguez to help him establish a perimeter defense. But this left the team without anyone to assess the civilian casualties or organize their limited medical resources effectively. Sarah looked around the chaotic scene and realized that someone needed to take charge of the humanitarian aspects of the mission, which were supposedly their primary objective. Without waiting for permission from Thompson, she moved toward the simulated civilians and began conducting triage assessments. "Peters, can you help me here?" Sarah called out. "We need to prioritize the most critical cases and figure out what medical supplies we have available." Angela immediately moved to assist, and together they began organizing the rescue efforts in a systematic way that their training had emphasized. Sarah's attention to detail and methodical approach proved invaluable as they identified which simulated victims needed immediate attention and which could wait for secondary care. Meanwhile, Thompson's aggressive perimeter defense strategy was creating problems. His team was using up ammunition and resources at an unsustainable rate, and their positioning was actually blocking some of the evacuation routes they would need to use later in the exercise. When a simulated enemy attack began, the flaws in Thompson's leadership became even more apparent. He started shouting conflicting orders, demanding that everyone abandon their current tasks to help with defense, which would have meant leaving critically wounded civilians behind. It was at this moment that Sarah made a decision that would define not just the exercise, but her entire future in the military. Instead of following Thompson's panicked instructions, she calmly assessed the situation and realized there was a way to accomplish both the defensive and humanitarian objectives. "Thompson, if you and Collins maintain position at the main entrance, Rodriguez can cover the side exit while Peters and I continue the evacuation through the back route," Sarah called out over the simulated gunfire. "That way we protect our defensive positions while still completing the mission." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Martinez," Thompson snapped back. "Everyone needs to focus on defense right now." But Rodriguez had been watching Sarah's systematic approach to the problem, and he could see that her plan made tactical sense. "Actually, Martinez might be right," he said. "We can't complete the mission if we abandon the civilians, and her evacuation route doesn't compromise our defensive positions." Angela Peters nodded in agreement. "Sarah's been organizing everything systematically. Her plan could work." For a moment, Thompson looked like he might explode with anger at having his authority challenged. But, as simulated enemy fire intensified and time pressure mounted, even he could see that Sarah's approach offered their best chance of success. Reluctantly, he agreed to try Sarah's plan, though he made it clear he wasn't happy about it. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, it's on you, Martinez." What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. Her plan worked flawlessly. The team successfully evacuated all the simulated civilians while maintaining their defensive positions, and they completed their objectives with time to spare and resources remaining. More importantly, every team member had played a meaningful role in the success, rather than some being relegated to insignificant tasks. As they exited the simulation area, Sarah could see Commander Reeves observing from a distance, making notes on his evaluation sheet. She tried not to read too much into his expression, but she thought she detected a slight nod of approval. The debriefing session that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her time in training. Instead of being criticized for her weaknesses or dismissed for her size, she found herself being asked detailed questions about her decision-making process and leadership approach. Martinez, walk us through your thinking when you decided to modify the team's initial strategy, Commander Reeves said during the group discussion. What factors influenced your tactical decisions? It was the first time anyone had asked Sarah to explain her thought process as if it might have value. She spoke carefully about how she had assessed the multiple objectives they needed to accomplish, identified the resources available to them, and developed a plan that could address all requirements simultaneously. I noticed that our primary mission was humanitarian aid, but we were focusing mostly on defense, Sarah explained. I thought we could do both if we coordinated better and used our positioning more strategically. Other instructors began asking follow-up questions about her approach, and Sarah found herself engaged in the kind of substantive discussion about military tactics and leadership that she had always hoped to have but never expected to experience. Thompson sat through the discussion with obvious displeasure, occasionally making comments about how theoretical planning was different from real-world execution. But his objections seemed to carry less weight in the face of the objective success of Sarah's approach. During a break in the debriefing, Commander Reeves approached Sarah privately. That was impressive work in there, Martinez. You demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive leadership and situational awareness that we value in special operations. Sarah felt a surge of pride and gratitude, but also a lingering uncertainty. Thank you, sir. But I have to ask, why are you taking such an interest in my performance? I mean, I appreciate the encouragement, but I'm just trying to make it through basic training like everyone else. Commander Reeves studied her for a moment, and then asked a question that caught her completely off guard. Martinez, do you have any tattoos? The question seemed so random and unexpected that Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. Yes, sir. I have one. But I'm not sure why that's relevant. Would you mind if I asked what it is? Reeves continued, his tone casual but somehow significant. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether this was appropriate territory for a military conversation. But something in Commander Reeves' manner suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. It's a memorial tattoo for my brother Miguel, Sarah said quietly. He was killed in action 3 years ago in Afghanistan. The tattoo includes his military designation and some symbols that were important to him. Commander Reeves nodded slowly, as if this information confirmed something he had been thinking about. What was your brother's unit designation? He was Marine Corps, sir. 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. He served 2 tours before. Sarah's voice trailed off, still finding it difficult to discuss Miguel's death even after 3 years. The expression on Commander Reeves' face shifted to something Sarah couldn't quite interpret. It was respectful and serious, but also somehow personal in a way that surprised her. Martinez, I need to tell you something, Reeves said carefully. I knew your brother. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she felt her knees go weak. You knew Miguel? Our units worked together on several operations during his 2nd deployment, Reeves explained. Miguel Martinez was one of the finest Marines I ever had the privilege to serve alongside. He saved a lot of lives, including some of my men. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, and she struggled to maintain her composure. She had hoped that joining the Navy might help her feel closer to Miguel's memory, but she had never expected to encounter someone who had actually known him, who had worked with him in those final months of his life. He talked about you, Commander Reeves continued gently. About his little sister who was planning to follow in his footsteps. He was incredibly proud of your decision to serve, and he used to say that you had the kind of determination that couldn't be taught. The tears were flowing freely now, and Sarah wiped them away as quickly as they came. He never told me he mentioned me to people he served with. Miguel was protective of his family's privacy, but he was also incredibly proud of you. And, watching you today, seeing how you handled that exercise, I can understand why. Commander Reeves paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I think Miguel would be very proud of the soldier you're becoming. The conversation was interrupted by Morrison calling for the resumption of debriefing, but, as they walked back toward the group, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of her place in the military. She wasn't just Sarah Martinez, the struggling recruit who couldn't keep up with physical demands. She was Miguel Martinez's sister, carrying forward a legacy of service and determination that had already earned respect from people like Commander Reeves. For the first time since arriving at the training facility, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. The revelation about Commander Reeves' connection to Miguel changed everything for Sarah, but not in the way she might have expected. Rather than feeling like she now had special protection or favoritism, she felt an even greater responsibility to prove herself worthy of her brother's legacy. The weight of that responsibility was both inspiring and terrifying. Over the next several days, word began to spread through the training facility about Sarah's performance in the simulation exercise. The story had grown in the telling, with some recruits describing how she had taken command during a crisis and led her team to success despite Thompson's initial resistance. Others focused on Commander Reeves' obvious interest in her development and his praise for her tactical thinking. The change in how others treated Sarah was gradual but unmistakable. Collins and Rodriguez, who had witnessed her leadership firsthand, began including her in conversations and asking for her input on training exercises. Angela Peters, who had worked closely with her during the simulation, started sitting with her at meals and treating her as a genuine colleague rather than an obligation. Even some of the recruits who had previously ignored or dismissed her began to show grudging respect. They might not fully understand what had happened during that simulation exercise, but they could see that someone as distinguished as Commander Reeves was taking serious interest in Sarah's development, and that commanded attention. Thompson, however, became more hostile than ever. His public humiliation during the exercise had clearly rankled, and he seemed to blame Sarah personally for making him look foolish in front of the SEAL commander. His comments became more pointed and cruel, often focusing on the idea that she was receiving special treatment because of connections rather than merit. "Must be nice having SEAL commanders as personal cheerleaders," Thompson muttered during one morning formation. "Some of us actually have to earn our place here the hard way." Morrison overheard the comment and shut it down immediately, but Sarah could see that Thompson's resentment was shared by some of the other recruits who had previously viewed her as harmless. Success, she was learning, came with its own set of challenges. Commander Reeves continued to observe training sessions over the following week, sometimes offering suggestions to the instructors about different ways to challenge the recruits. Sarah noticed that these new exercises often emphasized problem-solving and teamwork over pure physical strength, creating opportunities for her to contribute meaningfully while still maintaining the rigorous standards expected of naval personnel. During one particularly challenging night navigation exercise, Sarah found herself paired with 3 other recruits for a mission that required them to locate specific coordinates in complete darkness using only compass and map reading skills. Her systematic approach and attention to detail proved invaluable as the team navigated through difficult terrain without the benefit of GPS or electronic assistance. When her team was the first to successfully locate all their target coordinates, Sarah felt a satisfaction that was entirely different from any physical accomplishment. This was success earned through skills that came naturally to her, abilities that had practical value in real military operations. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Morrison said during the post-exercise debrief. It was the first unqualified praise she had ever received from him, and she could see that it surprised him almost as much as it surprised her. But the real transformation came during a training accident that occurred in the 4th week of Commander Reeves' visit. During a routine obstacle course exercise, Rodriguez suffered a serious fall that left him unconscious and potentially seriously injured. The accident happened at a remote part of the course, out of sight of the instructors, with only a few recruits nearby when it occurred. Thompson was the ranking recruit present, but the sight of Rodriguez lying motionless seemed to freeze him completely. He stood staring at the injured recruit, apparently unable to process what needed to be done. The other 2 recruits present looked to Thompson for direction, but he seemed incapable of providing it. It was Sarah who immediately took charge of the emergency situation. Drawing on her first aid training, she quickly assessed Rodriguez's condition while directing the other recruits to signal for medical help and secure the area. Her calm, methodical approach to the crisis stood in stark contrast to Thompson's paralysis. "Thompson, I need you to run back to the main facility and get the medics," Sarah directed, her voice steady despite the seriousness of the situation. "Tell them we have an unconscious recruit with possible head trauma. Collins, help me stabilize his neck and keep him warm." Thompson seemed grateful to have someone else making decisions, and he ran toward the main facility without arguing. Sarah continued to monitor Rodriguez's vital signs while providing clear, calm instructions to Collins about how to assist. When the medical team arrived, she gave them a concise, accurate report of Rodriguez's condition and the circumstances of the accident. Rodriguez recovered fully from his injuries, but the incident had been witnessed by several instructors and Commander Reeves himself, who had arrived with the medical team. Once again, Sarah had demonstrated the kind of leadership under pressure that distinguished effective military personnel from those who simply looked the part. That evening, Commander Reeves requested a private meeting with Sarah. They walked along the edge of the training facility as the sun set, creating an atmosphere more suitable for personal conversation than military instruction. "Martinez, I've been thinking about your future in the Navy," Reeves began. "Your performance over these past few weeks has been exceptional, particularly in areas that matter most in real-world operations." Sarah felt a familiar mix of hope and caution at his words. She had learned not to get too excited about praise, knowing how quickly circumstances could change. "I appreciate that, sir. I'm just trying to do my best and honor my brother's memory." "I think you're doing more than that," Reeves said. "I think you're demonstrating exactly the qualities that Miguel saw in you. And I want to talk to you about some opportunities that might be available to you after you complete basic training." He went on to explain that there were specialized roles within the Navy that valued exactly the skills Sarah had been demonstrating: analytical thinking, leadership under pressure, the ability to coordinate complex operations, and the mental toughness to persist through adversity. These positions often involved working with elite units on special operations that required more than just physical strength. "I'm not talking about special treatment or shortcuts," Reeves clarified. "I'm talking about career paths that would make the best use of your particular strengths while still maintaining the highest standards of military excellence." Sarah listened carefully as he described opportunities in naval intelligence, special operations support, and advanced technical fields that she had never known existed. For the first time since joining the Navy, she began to envision a future that looked beyond just surviving basic training. "But first," Reeves continued, "you need to complete your current training successfully. And that means continuing to develop all your capabilities, including the physical aspects that have been challenging for you." Over the remaining weeks of basic training, Sarah approached her development with renewed purpose. She still struggled with some of the purely physical challenges, but her overall performance was now consistently strong. More importantly, she had earned genuine respect from her fellow recruits and instructors based on demonstrated competence rather than sympathy or special consideration. Thompson eventually came to grudgingly acknowledge her abilities, particularly after the incident with Rodriguez made it clear that leadership wasn't always about being the biggest or loudest person in the room. Their relationship never became friendly, but it evolved from open hostility to professional respect. The final weeks of training included comprehensive evaluations that tested every aspect of the recruit's development. Sarah performed well across all categories, earning particularly high marks in leadership exercises, tactical planning, and crisis management. Her physical fitness scores, while not exceptional, met all required standards. During the graduation ceremony, Sarah wore her dress uniform with a pride she had never expected to feel when she first arrived at the facility months earlier. As she looked out at the assembled crowd of family members and military personnel, she thought about Miguel and how proud he would have been to see her complete this chapter of her military journey. Commander Reeves spoke at the graduation ceremony, addressing the entire class of new sailors about the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead of them. But when his eyes met Sarah's during his speech, she felt a personal connection to his words about service, sacrifice, and the different forms that military excellence could take. After the ceremony, as families gathered to celebrate with the newly graduated sailors, Sarah found herself approached by Morrison, who had been her most demanding critic throughout training. "Martinez," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived here, I didn't think you had what it takes to be an effective sailor. I was wrong." The admission meant more to Sarah than any praise she had received, because it represented acknowledgement from someone who had seen every moment of her struggle and growth. "You never made things easy for me, sir, but I think that made me a better sailor in the end," Sarah replied. "Thank you for not giving up on me. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah noticed Thompson approaching. She tensed slightly, unsure what to expect from their final interaction. "Martinez," Thompson said, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it. "I wanted to say I was wrong about a lot of things. About what makes someone tough, about what qualifies someone to serve. You're tougher than most of us, and you deserve to be here." It wasn't a complete apology for months of cruel treatment, but it was acknowledgement of her worth as a soldier, and that felt like enough. Commander Reeves found Sarah as the ceremony was winding down, carrying an official-looking folder of documents. "Martinez, these are your orders for advanced training," he said, handing her the folder. "Intelligence School, with a track toward special operations support. It's challenging work, but I think you'll find it suits your capabilities." Sarah opened the folder and saw orders that represented everything she had hoped for but never dared to expect: an assignment that would utilize her analytical skills, her leadership abilities, and her determination while allowing her to serve at the highest levels of military operations. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you for believing in me when no one else did," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to thank me," Reeves replied. "You earned this through your own efforts. Miguel would be proud, but, more importantly, you should be proud of yourself." As Sarah prepared to leave the training facility for her next assignment, she reflected on how completely her understanding of military service had evolved. She had entered basic training thinking that success meant proving she could be just as physically strong as any man. Instead, she had learned that true military excellence came in many forms, and that her particular combination of mental toughness, analytical thinking, and leadership ability was not just acceptable but valuable. She thought about the spine tattoo that had connected her to Commander Reeves and, through him, to Miguel's memory in a way she could never have anticipated. The tattoo had been meant as a private tribute to her brother, but it had become the key to unlocking a future she had never imagined possible. Standing in her dress uniform, surrounded by fellow sailors who now respected her as a peer, Sarah Martinez felt the satisfaction of someone who had not just survived a difficult journey, but had emerged stronger and more capable than she had ever believed possible. The mocking and humiliation were behind her now, replaced by genuine achievement and the promise of even greater challenges ahead. Her spine tattoo, hidden beneath her uniform but always present, would continue to remind her of Miguel's sacrifice and her own determination to honor his memory through service. But now it also represented something new, proof that sometimes the most important battles are won not through physical strength, but through the courage to persist when everything seems impossible. As she prepared to begin the next phase of her naval career, Sarah Martinez was no longer the struggling recruit who had been mocked and humiliated during those first difficult months. She was a United States Navy sailor with specialized skills and unlimited potential, ready to serve her country in ways that would have made both Miguel and Commander Reeves proud. The transformation was complete, but the real adventure was just beginning.